Julie Andrews, the angelic soprano of the silver screen and one of the most cherished icons in entertainment history, enchanted the world with her voice, grace, and unforgettable presence for over 7 decades. Her transformation from a wartime child singing in shelters to an Oscar-winning legend who defined generations through Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music is nothing short of miraculous. But behind the timeless smile and crystal-clear voice lies a hidden sorrow, a private devastation that nearly broke her spirit and ended the very gift that made her who she was. What really happened to the woman whose voice once lit up the world? And why did she keep the most painful truth of her life buried for so long? Now, at nearly 90, it seems the pain has never truly let her go. And before we begin, tell us, what does Julie Andrews mean to you, and which of her roles still lives in your heart? Julie Andrews was not born beneath a spotlight. Long before the world would come to see her as the radiant embodiment of music and grace, she was simply Julia Elizabeth Wells, a fragile child growing up in the shadows of grief, shame, and secrets too heavy for any heart, let alone a young one. Born in Walton-on-Thames in 1935, she spent the first 14 years of her life believing that the gentle, loving man she called Dad, Edward Charles Wells, was truly her father. He taught school by day and gave her a sense of safety no one else could. But then came the moment that tore the fabric of her identity apart. One evening in 1950, her mother Barbara sat her down and revealed the truth. Julie was the product of an affair. The man who had loved and protected her wasn't the man who had given her life. That single revelation didn't just hurt. It detonated something deep within her. To learn that your very existence was born from betrayal and that your entire foundation had been built on a lie is the kind of emotional wound that time doesn't close. It just teaches you to hide it better. But that wasn't the only darkness Julie carried. After her parents split during the chaos of World War II, she was sent to live with her mother and new stepfather, Ted Andrews, a vaudeville entertainer who praised her golden voice but brought with him a darker, more terrifying presence. The family lived in wartime poverty, tucked into bomb-damaged neighborhoods of London, where hope was scarce and safety even scarcer. And then, the nightmare. Ted, drunk and unstable, crossed a line no child should ever face, not once, but twice. These weren't isolated incidents. They were traumas, buried like explosives inside her memory, silent but devastating. From that point on, she bolted her bedroom door at night, not for modesty, but for survival. It's a detail so haunting, so raw, that even decades later, it carries the weight of all she never said aloud. Julie's childhood wasn't simply hard, it was fractured, wounded, and irreversibly stained by fear. And yet, in the midst of that chaos, there was one unbreakable thing: her voice, clear as crystal, piercing through pain like light through darkness. That voice wasn't just a gift, it was salvation. It gave her a way to exist beyond the trauma, a place where no one could touch her. Ted Andrews, despite the harm he caused, recognized her brilliance and pushed her toward performance. And therein lies the cruel paradox. Her rise to greatness began under the control of the very man who had broken her trust. It's a truth almost too painful to bear. But that was her beginning. Julie's ascent wasn't born of applause, it was born of resistance. Quiet, desperate, determined resistance to everything that tried to silence her. And somehow, miraculously, she sang. She didn't choose her voice, it chose her. In a childhood marked by betrayal and fear, When silence became a shield and survival a daily ritual, something miraculous began to rise from within Julie Andrews, a voice not merely beautiful, but transcendent. Her stepfather, Ted Andrews, deeply flawed, painfully complex, was the first to recognize the extraordinary in the fragile girl under his roof. Her voice wasn't just pretty, it was pure, radiant, and haunting, too powerful, too precise, too ethereal for someone so young. It sounded like it came from somewhere beyond the pain. And perhaps it did. Singing became the one place she could exist untouched, unbroken, a sacred refuge carved from chaos. Her gift wasn't born of joy, it was born of need. Determined to shape this rare talent, Julie was enrolled at the Cohn Ripman School, now Tring Park School for the Performing Arts, a haven for young prodigies. But the true turning point came when she began training under Madame Lillian Stiles Allen, a revered soprano with the discipline of a drill sergeant and the tenderness of a soul who understood wounded brilliance when she saw it. Julie would later call her a third mother, a title that carried both reverence and emotional weight. Under Stiles Allen's demanding yet maternal guidance, the voice that had once been a whisper of hope began to transform into a force of nature. Her range was jaw-dropping, her pitch uncannily precise, her tone so clear it could slice through silence. Stiles Allen believed Julie was destined for Mozart and Rossini. Julie joked her voice was sharp enough to summon dogs, but behind the humor was a relentless fire. She practiced until her throat ached, traveling alone through bitter cold to Leeds for lessons in gas-lit rooms where the air froze, and so did her hands. But she never stopped. Her teacher's mantra echoed through every note. The amateur works until he gets it right. The professional works until he cannot go wrong. Julie lived that truth. Her voice wasn't merely trained, it was tempered, like steel. At just 12, she made her professional debut at the London Hippodrome in Starlight Roof, tackling the daunting aria Je suis Titania with such command it left audiences breathless. This wasn't a child mimicking adults. This was a child eclipsing them. And then, at only 13, she stood alone on the grand stage of the Royal Command Variety performance at the London Palladium, singing before King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. She was the youngest soloist to ever perform there. But more than a milestone, it was a message. A girl forged in pain had found her power. These weren't the first steps of a career. They were seismic shifts, giant leaps into a world she was destined to remake in her image. And yet, behind the polish and perfection, there was still a shadow in her gaze, a discipline that bordered on defiance, a calm born not of confidence, but of someone who understood just how easily things could be taken away. She kept singing, on stage, on radio, in pantomimes, not just because she loved it, but because she had to. Every note was precision, every performance, armor. The world applauded the prodigy. But behind each ovation was a girl who had once locked her bedroom door in fear, now standing tall, singing not for applause, but for liberation. With every breath, she reclaimed what life had tried to silence. She may have been shattered in childhood, but Julie Andrews never let that brokenness define her. She molded it into something eternal. Her path to greatness wasn't a graceful ascent. It was a brutal, uphill battle, paved with rejection, loneliness, and the quiet defiance of a girl who refused to be silenced. At only 19, she left behind the foggy comfort of England to brave the glaring unknown of America. It was 1954, with no connections, no safety net, only a soprano as clear as crystal and a spirit sharpened by survival. Julie stepped onto a Broadway stage in The Boyfriend and disarmed everyone in the room. Critics raved, audiences wept, and with that, a new star was born, her brilliance impossible to ignore. She earned the Theatre World Award, but that was merely the foothill. The summit came 2 years later with My Fair Lady, a role so demanding it had intimidated seasoned stars. Yet Julie, still in her early 20s, carried it with astonishing grace. As Eliza Doolittle, she didn't just act, she transformed, evolving each night before the audience's eyes. The production ran over 2,700 times. Broadway wasn't just applauding, it was bowing. But just as Hollywood reached out, the dream twisted into heartbreak. When it came time for the film adaptation, Julie was coldly passed over for Audrey Hepburn, a decision driven not by talent, but by star power. It was a crushing betrayal. Julie had poured her soul into Eliza, and now the role was being stripped away. That kind of rejection could have destroyed her. But fate, it seems, was simply making room for something greater. Walt Disney had witnessed her stage magic and knew he was looking at Mary Poppins. He offered her the role, even delaying production so she could give birth. Still reeling from the My Fair Lady blow, Julie hesitated. But when she finally said yes, destiny opened its arms. Mary Poppins exploded into a cultural phenomenon. Julie's performance was effortless yet deeply moving, whimsical yet profound. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, triumphing over none other than Audrey Hepburn. It wasn't revenge, it was poetic justice. She had conquered Hollywood not by playing its games, but by honoring her truth. And she didn't stop there. 1 year later came The Sound of Music. As Maria, she became the heartbeat of a film that would transcend generations. Her image, arms wide atop an Austrian mountaintop, was seared into cinematic history. But the beauty on screen masked the brutality behind it. Each take left her bruised, battered by helicopter downdrafts, soaked in sweat. But Julie never complained. She knew that art, real art, demanded everything. The film would go on to earn over $286 million and 5 Oscars. But more than numbers, it gave the world a new symbol, not just of joy, but of perseverance in its purest form. Julie wasn't chasing fame, she was building a life. Every dollar she earned was saved, invested, not in status, but in security. She bought a quiet London home, then a modest retreat in California. Her wealth wasn't flaunted. It was quietly folded into a future she was building with her second husband, director Blake Edwards. Together, they weathered storms, career highs and private lows. But Julie remained steadfast. Because beneath the spotlight's glow still lived that little girl who once turned a locked door into her only sanctuary. That memory never faded. It fueled her. With every role, every song, she wasn't just creating magic, she was reclaiming herself. Her voice, once said to be pure enough to summon angels, became both shield and sword. And in those golden years, she didn't just shine, she radiated. Not because she was handed stardom, but because she forged it from sorrow and lifted it with song. At the height of grace, when Julie Andrews appeared to have everything, fame, fortune, and a legacy carved in gold, a quiet storm was gathering, poised to shatter the very core of who she was. On the surface, her life seemed charmed, a career gilded with applause, beloved characters, and international reverence. But fate has a cruel way of testing even the strongest, and Julie's test arrived not with thunder, but with a whisper, a faint hoarseness, barely noticeable at first. But it was the beginning of an unthinkable descent. The woman whose voice had once soared through opera houses, enchanted royal audiences, and defined generations in Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music, that voice began to falter. In 1997, while performing in the Broadway run of Victor Victoria, Julie sought medical advice for what doctors called benign vocal nodules. The prognosis seemed harmless. The recommended surgery? Routine? Safe? Assured. But what followed was anything but. The procedure damaged her vocal cords irreparably, turning the celestial soprano into a fragile rasp. It wasn't just a loss of sound, it was the erasure of identity. She awoke from the operation not to relief, but to absence. The silence wasn't external. It lived inside her. Julie later described the moment as a death inside. What do you do when your soul's expression is taken from you? She tried everything. 4 more surgeries, consultations with top specialists, prayers whispered in private. None could restore what had been taken. Publicly, she maintained composure. Privately, she unraveled. The grief was suffocating. It crept in during the quiet hours, filled the empty spaces where music once lived. Her laughter, once effortless, became measured. Her public appearances, though polished, grew fewer. The voice that had once lit up entire theaters now barely lit a room. Blake Edwards, her husband and creative partner, revealed in 1998. What she feared most had come true. She would never sing again. Their home, once filled with melodies and laughter, now held a silence that neither could fix. Julie stared at ceilings at night, grieving not a career, but a part of her being. She would later confide, in hushed interviews, that she felt like a part of her had died, not in a metaphorical sense, but in the visceral, soul-crushing kind that strips away purpose. And when therapy couldn't ease the ache, she turned to justice. She filed a malpractice suit against Mount Sinai Hospital and the surgeons who had promised hope but delivered heartbreak. The suit alleged she had never been properly warned of the risks. The legal process was emotionally draining, a new form of trauma layered upon the old. Though the case was eventually settled in 2000 for an undisclosed amount, no monetary sum could reclaim the voice that once moved millions. No courtroom decision could soothe the wound of silence. For someone like Julie Andrews, whose very essence had been her ability to express, communicate, and connect through voice, this wasn't just a professional setback. It was an existential crisis. Imagine being known your whole life for a light that no longer shines. Imagine trying to face the mirror when the reflection doesn't recognize you anymore. That's what Julie lived with. She once said, "I felt as though my identity had been stolen. I didn't know who I was without that sound." Her daughter, Emma, later revealed that in those early years after the surgery, her mother would sometimes fall into deep silences, retreating inward. She wasn't angry. She was lost. And yet, from that loss came a different kind of clarity. Julie knew she could not remain broken. She had survived darker things before. This time, instead of her voice, she would use her words. She poured her heart into storytelling, co-authoring dozens of children's books with Emma. These weren't just stories for kids. They were extensions of herself, little songs made of ink and love. She also lent her changed voice to narrations and animation. Queen Lillian in the Shrek franchise, the regal narrator in Bridgerton, even in a different register, her presence remained commanding. In those roles, Julie proved that you can lose the tools you were born with and still carve new instruments of purpose. She once reflected, "My voice is different now, but maybe that's okay. Maybe there's still something to say." Most beautifully, she turned her personal tragedy into a mission. She became a vocal advocate for vocal health, funding research into vocal cord restoration, and supporting innovations in non-invasive treatments. She wanted to make sure no one else had to endure what she had, to wake up one day and feel hollowed out by silence. Even in devastation, Julie refused to vanish. Her grief never disappeared, but she transformed it into books, into causes, into wisdom. In place of song, she offered strength. In place of melodies, she gave meaning. The world had once loved her for her voice, but came to revere her for her resilience. Julie Andrews may have lost her voice, but in that silence, she found something equally powerful: an unbreakable spirit. Her pain became purpose, her tragedy, a quiet triumph. And though she may never again hit those high notes, her story continues to soar. Because in the end, Julie Andrews didn't just sing for the world. She taught it what it means to survive the silence and rise. Though the world often remembers Julie Andrews as a woman of unwavering poise and incandescent charm, behind that elegance was a heart scarred not only by silence, but by love, deep, consuming, and ultimately heartbreaking. The tragedy of losing her voice was devastating. Yes, but the emotional pain that lived quietly inside her chest extended far beyond the music. It was the kind of sorrow that doesn't echo in grand auditoriums, but in the quiet corners of memory where love once bloomed and slowly withered. Julie's first great love, her first anchor in a chaotic world, was Tony Walton, the boy she met at just 13 years old. He was 2 years older, a theater-obsessed teen with gentle eyes and a sketchbook always in hand. They met during a Christmas pantomime in London. Julie was starring in Humpty Dumpty, and Tony was watching from the front row, utterly mesmerized by the girl with pigtails and a voice that could silence an entire auditorium. That fleeting moment became a seed, quietly growing into a love that would one day define her early adulthood. Years of letters, late-night train rides, shared dreams, and artistic passion led to their wedding in 1959. It was a union of kindred spirits. She, the rising star of stage and screen. He, the visionary designer whose sets would one day grace the world's most iconic theaters. In 1962, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Catherine, whom Julie would later call the greatest gift of her life. For a time, it felt like a storybook, the kind Julie might later write for children. A beautiful home, laughter over late dinners, shared creative triumphs, and the intoxicating sense that they had built something unbreakable. But even fairy tales can unravel under the weight of reality. As Julie's star ascended into the stratosphere, Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, international press tours, Oscars, red carpets, she was pulled in every direction. The demands of global fame were relentless, offering little space for pause, for intimacy, or for presence. Tony, though successful in his own right, moved to a different beat. His world was quieter, rooted in artistic detail and backstage brilliance. Slowly, the harmony that once defined their love was replaced by dissonance. Time together became rare, conversations brief and tired. They weren't angry, they weren't cruel, they were simply fading. "We were like ships in the night," Julie once reflected, passing each other with love, but with no harbor to rest in. In 1967, after nearly a decade of marriage, they separated quietly. No public scandal, no shouting headlines. Just the slow, painful erosion of something sacred. For Julie, it wasn't just a divorce. It was the collapse of a dream she had believed in with her whole heart. She had thought love could survive anything: distance, ambition, chaos. But it couldn't survive invisibility. She once confessed that walking away from Tony felt like abandoning a version of myself I had always cherished. The pain was not just about losing a partner. It was about losing the mirror that had once reflected her truest self. In the years that followed, she struggled privately, even as the world saw her as unshakable. Beneath the designer gowns and standing ovations was a woman quietly grieving, a single mother, a soul searching for clarity. She immersed herself in therapy, trying to understand the choices she'd made and the consequences they carried. "I felt like I had failed," she admitted in a rare interview. "Not just him, not just Emma, but myself." The guilt was relentless. Had she chosen career over connection? Had she run too hard, too fast, for too long? Could she have saved it if she'd simply paused? But there are no easy answers in the ruins of love. There is only reflection. And for Julie Andrews, that reflection became part of her healing. Her work became quieter, more intentional. She became fiercely devoted to Emma, determined to be present in a way fame had once denied her. She spoke kindly of Tony in interviews, never with bitterness. Only gratitude, only grace. They remained friends, their love transformed but never erased. And perhaps that is Julie's greatest legacy, not just in voice or in film, but in how she handled heartbreak. Not with bitterness, but with beauty. She didn't bury the pain, she honored it, learned from it, and let it shape the woman she would become. Then came Blake Edwards, a man she hadn't expected, in a moment she hadn't planned. A second chance at love arrived not with a grand romantic gesture, but quietly, almost comically, as they crossed paths outside a therapist's office. Two weary souls carrying the weight of past wounds, Julie from the slow heartbreak of divorce and identity loss, Blake from a long, turbulent marriage and his private battle with demons of the mind. Neither was looking for anything, and yet, in each other, they found an inexplicable calm. Not fireworks, refuge. Their connection was instant, but the journey that followed was anything but effortless. Blake, a brilliant filmmaker, was also a man haunted by chronic illness and deep, unrelenting waves of depression. He was witty and charismatic, but vulnerable in ways few saw. Julie, ever poised and composed for the world's gaze, now found herself the steady hand behind closed doors, the caregiver, the emotional anchor, the quiet warrior holding together a life that often teetered under invisible weight. "He was my rock," she often said, "but I was his anchor." Few understood how heavy it was to hold steady for someone else while carrying your own invisible cracks. And still, they endured. For 41 years, they built a life stitched together with equal parts resilience, creativity, and fiercely protective love. They collaborated on films, Victor, Victoria, That's Life, Darling Lily, turning shared artistry into shared healing. Their home, though touched by darkness, was filled with laughter, books, spirited conversation, and a sense of unshakable belonging. In the mid-1970s, they expanded their family, adopting 2 daughters from Vietnam, Amy and Joanna. It was a bold decision in a time when few celebrities spoke of transnational adoption, but Julie embraced motherhood with fierce devotion. Their blended family became her universe, and Blake, though emotionally fragile, remained the soul of it. But love, as life has taught her over and over, is never immune to loss. In 2010, after years of declining health, Blake Edwards passed away from complications due to pneumonia. Julie was at his side, holding his hand, whispering into the silence memories only they had shared. His departure didn't come with drama or spectacle. It came with stillness, and it carved a hollow in her world no applause could ever fill. The silence Blake left was not like the one she had known after losing her voice. This silence was deeper, lonelier. It was the absence of morning conversations, the sound of his laugh at a shared joke, the quiet strength of being known without words. "I felt untethered," she confessed years later, "like a tree ripped from its roots." From that moment on, something subtle shifted. Julie continued to show up for the world, with grace, with charm, with wisdom. But those closest to her saw it. Her smiles were softer, her laughter less frequent. The gleam in her eyes, once playful and mischievous, now held a distant ache, a gentleness born of long-held sorrow. In interviews, she rarely mentioned the word lonely, but you could hear it. In the pauses, in the breath she took before changing the subject. One journalist recalled watching her gaze drift out a window during an interview, lost for just a second, before she quietly said, "It never leaves you, even when the person does. It becomes part of your bones." That's the thing about grief. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through your posture, your eyes, your silences. And Julie, ever the consummate performer, let her grief live beside her, not hidden, but woven into the tapestry of who she had become. In the twilight of her years, she didn't speak of fairy tale romance. She spoke of real love, complicated, painful, enduring, the kind that transforms you, the kind that stays even after it's gone. Through Blake, Julie Andrews learned that love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect endings. Sometimes it's about staying through illness, through quiet despair, through the slow fading of laughter. And when it ends, it's about remembering with gratitude rather than bitterness. Her love stories weren't cinematic illusions. They were human truths, raw, imperfect, yet fiercely beautiful. And so, in the quiet that followed his passing, she remained, dignified, strong, and quietly altered. No longer the wide-eyed ingenue or the radiant soprano, but a woman who had loved deeply and lost profoundly. A woman who still stood, rooted in memory, with a heart that continued to carry every note, every whisper, every touch. In the hushed serenity of her later years, after the ovations have faded and the curtains have long since fallen, Julie Andrews has not retreated from the world, but quietly, with extraordinary dignity, redefined her place within it. Now, as she steps gracefully into her 90s, she does so not with the vanity of stardom, but with the quiet strength of a woman who has weathered the storm and chosen, time and again, to stand in the sun. To millions, she remains the voice of Mary Poppins, the spirit of Maria von Trapp. But to those who know her more intimately, her family, her closest collaborators, the children who curl up with her books, she is something far deeper, a survivor, a sage, and a gentle force of nature who has never stopped creating, guiding, and giving. With an estimated net worth of $30 million as of 2025, Julie's lifestyle is steeped in refined taste and deep appreciation. Never excess. Her homes have never been trophies. They've been sanctuaries. Among them, West Lodge in Wimbledon remains one of the most exquisite symbols of her early success. A grand Victorian estate, once fragmented into flats, which Julie had restored into a single majestic residence in the 1960s. It whispered elegance, arched windows, original oak floors, a spiral staircase that felt like something from a musical itself. For a brief time, it was her fortress. Another treasured chapter resided in Chester Square, where Julie and Blake Edwards hosted soirees that shimmered with understated glamour. Peter Sellers, Audrey Hepburn, Omar Sharif. Yet, the real magic was never the guest list, but the love and wit exchanged over candlelight. Her former car collection was just as eclectic and poetic. The 1960s Bentley S2, sleek, poised, utterly timeless, was a mirror of the Julie the world adored. The Lexus UX she favored later in life, practical yet refined, told a story of evolution, of grounding without compromise. Most sentimental of all was a Pierce Arrow Model 80 from the 1920s. More than a car, it was a memory of an era she helped immortalize, a nod to a golden age that pulses through her legacy. But Julie's true legacy, now more than ever, lies in how she chooses to live. Far from the lights of Hollywood, she serves as artistic director of Bay Street Theater in New York, lending her vision and voice to the next generation of performers and storytellers. Her collaboration with daughter Emma Walton Hamilton has blossomed into a prolific second act. Over 30 children's books, many award-winning, some deeply personal. Their bond is not just mother and daughter. It is co-authors, co-dreamers, crafting stories that reflect the very values Julie has always embodied: empathy, imagination, grace. Even her voice, though softer, aged by time and pain, has found new resonance. Queen Lillian in Shrek, the narrator of Bridgerton, even the voice of Marlena in Despicable Me. In each role, her cadence is warm, wise, unwavering. It no longer soars as it once did, but it still moves. And that is Julie, constantly evolving, never disappearing. Her home today is described by visitors as a haven of peace, shelves spilling with books, floral arrangements lovingly curated, framed photographs of a life fully lived, the echoes of grandchildren's laughter, the scent of fresh tea and worn paper. It is not a shrine to fame. It is a living portrait of a woman who has embraced each phase of life with authenticity. She no longer needs the world's attention. What she seeks is presence, time with loved ones, meaningful work, causes that matter. And she still gives, quietly, humbly, without headlines. She funds research into vocal cord restoration. She champions literacy, arts education, and women's leadership. She shows up, not on red carpets, but in classrooms, at community theaters, in the pages of books gifted to children who may never know she once sang to millions. And when asked how she hopes to be remembered, Julie answered with the gentleness of someone who has nothing left to prove. Kindness. And maybe making someone's day a little brighter. This is not the epilogue of Julie Andrews. This is her encore. Not with high notes, but with higher purpose. Not with the applause of the world, but with the quiet impact of a life well lived, well fought, and still unfolding. She is not fading. She is glowing. With every child who discovers her voice through story, with every student who finds courage on stage, with every soul who remembers her smile in the sound of music, she continues. And perhaps this is her greatest triumph of all. Not the roles she played, but the woman she became. Not the perfection of pitch, but the perseverance of spirit. Julie Andrews stands today not just as a legend, but as a living testament to grace after glory, resilience after ruin, and the kind of love that echoes long after the curtain falls. If Julie Andrews has ever touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Which moment in her journey moved you most? And if you believe her story deserves to be passed on, please consider liking this video, not just for us, but as a tribute to a life that continues to inspire across generations.